Amen. The last time we left off looking at how our new life in Christ should affect the ways that we live and all the different relationships that we have in life. And Peter gave instruction to servants on how they are to behave. And of course, again, as we've mentioned other times, the New Testament is written to be applied not just in the United States, where we have our system where we have a Bill of Rights and uh, recognize that all men are created equal and all of that. That's not the world that the church was planted in and everything began in. It began in the Roman Empire, where there were 60 million people who were slaves, and these slaves were from all different countries around the world that the Romans had conquered. Many of them were highly educated people that would be tutors for the Romans' children. And it's not just field hands or whatever that you talk about being a slave in the Roman Empire. There were people that very highly educated and cultured people that were in slavery, and then manual laborers as well. And the Bible is written to transform and save people in all different kinds of societies and governments and so on. And we're not, to upend everything in a society by violence. Slavery is something that, because of the Bible's influence, has been done away with around the world where the Bible has influence. But it's not God's way to come in and turn society upside down overnight, but to work like leaven in people's hearts and minds to change their hearts so that they'll understand that everybody's created equal and everybody should be treated with justice and fairness. And over time, slavery is done away with. But these people did live under that system of slavery. And they were to make sure they didn't bring the church as slaves by being rebellious and disobedient. So they're instructed, servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. And they recognize they're servants of Jesus Christ. Our purpose on earth is to glorify our God in heaven through Christ and represent the gospel in the most favorable way. So not because your master's reasonable or good and kind, even if he's unreasonable. Since you're in this position, you should be the very best servant you can be and be submissive and be obedient, even if the person is unreasonable. And of course, this applies in many different relationships that we might find ourselves, maybe with the unreasonable government that's over us. We still should try to be the very best citizens we can for the glory of God. If you're in maybe a marriage where you've got a husband that's not a very reasonable person, you try to be the very best wife you can be to glorify Christ and glorify God. So whatever relationship we might find ourselves in, we always try to be an excellent person, do an excellent job for God's sake. So the principles governing Christian behavior in suffering. Here he talks about servants that may be abused by their masters, even though they're doing a good job and doing what's right, because maybe just because they're Christians now and they obeyed the gospel, their masters are mean to them. So what do? Does that give you a reason to rebel or to do evil in return? No, for God's sake, His glory, you do what's right anyway, even if you have to suffer for doing the right thing. So that's the next section. And he's going to use Jesus Christ as the ultimate example of being willing to suffer for doing what's right. And none of us has suffered as much as Christ did on our behalf. So we should be willing, if we're in this oppressive type of situation, to suffer for him. And at different times we may be called upon to suffer for the Lord, even though we haven't done anything hurtful or harmful to anybody. So verses 19 through 21 says, "For this finds favor, if for the sake of conscience towards God, a man bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. For you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps. So it is going to bring you favor, credit with God if you do what's right and suffer for it. Right? Because you love him, you put his law first in your heart. He says that's going to gain credit with God. And that's what we're after. That's what we want to do, is please God. What our life is supposed to be dedicated to is glorifying God. That's why we were created, why we were born again. So remember what your ultimate goal is, and it'll help these servants that are suffering persecution. For this finds favor, it says in verse 19, if for conscience sake towards God a man bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. So always our motive is to be subject even to unreasonable masters and unreasonable people. If that's our lot in life, to glorify God, we want to act the right way. And it finds favor with God. It should be an encouragement that your suffering isn't in vain. It's not for nothing. God is pleased with it, and he's going to reward us someday much greater than any sacrifice that we might make. The word favor there, or charis in the Greek, means goodwill, loving kindness, favor. I want that from God, don't you? I want that shining down on me. If I suffer for doing what's right, his face is shining on you. He loves you, and he's going to reward you someday. This wins for us God's favor. A friendly attitude and commendation is the idea of God's favor. It finds favor if we do the right thing for conscience toward him, for conscience sake. We're taught in the things that we do. Your conscience, you can see the word there in the Greek is a compound word. The first of it, the prefix is son, means together or with. Oida is the second part of the word. It means to know or joint knowledge. The soul as distinguishing between what is morally good and bad is your conscience. Prompting to do the former, to do the good, and shun the latter, to do bad. Commending the one and condemning the other. Conscience, because conscience is impressed and governed by the idea of God, is what he's talking about in this verse. Our conscience is being submissive and obedient and being a good servant because we're conscious of what God's law is, that's what we're supposed to do. And that gives us a good conscience because we are obedient even to unreasonable people. People that harshly treat us, we still do good instead of evil because we know that pleases God. That's the idea for conscience towards God. So the man who acts according to his conscience has God's favor. And of course, again, when you talk about your conscience, we are always to keep a good conscience. We recognize the conscience isn't a safe guide if it's not properly enlightened and instructed by the Word of God. So these people know what God teaches about how they should be obedient. They know what a duty of a servant ought to be. You do good. You obey. And so for conscience towards God, they're doing the right thing. And that's the way we need to live our life every day, getting up determined to keep a good conscience toward God. Do the things God commands us to do in every relationship we have. All says, if a man bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. These sorrows are inflicted, one writer said, to make the poor, helpless servant suffer, are in reality a promise of God's favor if he bears up under them because he is conscious of God who sees all and will reward all. To bear up under is to bear up a thing placed on one's shoulders is sort of the figure. We have this suffering and this burden to bear in serving some unreasonable person. And it's a burden on our shoulders we take up because we're going to please God. And we're going to bear it patiently, and we're going to endure this load that's been placed on us of sorrow and annoyances and afflictions, or suffering, pasco, where we get the, like the passion of Christ or whatever, undergo evil and affliction unjustly, undeservedly. People don't treat you right because you're a Christian. You bear up under that, and it finds favor. Finds favor with God. Does anybody have a comment or a question on verse 19? Big order, isn't it? I mean, you're a servant, you're a slave, and you're in this situation. I mean, that's a tall order. I'm going to go on doing right and treat right. I'm not going to retaliate. I'm not going to do evil for evil. I'm going to do what's right because God says this is what I should do. And those people are going to be out there on Judgment Day, I think about. If we're not willing to do our duty and act right and return good for evil, those people are going to be there on Judgment Day that did it. We're not going to hold up well, are we? We don't. So they were in this most difficult situation, yet they were faithful. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. So he looks at it from the negative side, then he repeats the positive side. If you're, there's no credit if you get punished and you're ill-treated because you're a sinner and you do what's wrong. There's no credit in that. You're getting what you deserve if you're a rebellious servant and disobedient. So he says there's no credit to you for that. But if you do the right thing and suffer for it, well, there's some credit. The word credit there is basically kleos, glory, fame, praise, to win fame for oneself. Approval is another way you could translate it. You get approval and credit and praise from God if you suffer for doing what's right. But there's no credit for standing up patiently to punishment for sinning. There's not any before God. So, suppose you become resentful and you sin against your conscience and you cease to do your best for your master, and then he punishes you. There's no credit in that at all. So keep hanging in there. Keep doing the right thing, even if you get treated. If you do get treated harshly and unreasonably, God gives you credit. He's going to reward you. He's going to approve you. So we don't just think about what we get in this life. That's why so many people want to give up or whatever because they think this life's all there is. Well, I'm a Christian and it's not coming out well. I'm doing the right thing and I'm in this bad situation and people aren't treating me right. But that wasn't the deal, was it? It's not that we're going to get everything in this life. It's that God's going to reward us and approve us in the life to come. That's what we serve for. As Paul said, if all we get is, reward in this life for being a Christian, we're more of all men most to be pitied, because look at how the apostles were treated. So they were being harshly treated. Look at the meaning of this word, harshly treated. It means to strike with the fist. That's the basic meaning. And I'm sure it's used probably as a figure of speech here. But it's like you get pounded, you get punched around as a servant. Is the idea of the word. Give one a blow with the fist, in a specific term for a general to maltreat, to treat with violence and insults. And again, it might be that you're getting treated that way because, you go to church and you were baptized and you became a Christian. You don't follow the old gods anymore. And so they pick you out for special bad treatment because you were converted to Christ. But you get this praise and credit. Well, a good conscience brings credit with God, and that ought to be an easy choice to get on God's side in this. But if you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. So God is going to show favor if you keep that true and good conscience and keep doing the right thing. We don't ever want to give up that divine favor, do we? We want to keep doing the right thing. We want to keep God's face shining on us and patiently endure, to remain, abide, not recede or flee, figuratively, to endure, to bear bravely and calmly ill treatment. Getting punched around or whatever they're doing to this servant, and he just keeps on doing the right thing. You bear bravely the harsh